Now, we've been discussing this on a number of occasions this season, particularly on the GPFans Stewards Room podcast after every single race so far in 2021. Track limitations. A lot of people have been divided about how the FIA have enforced track limitations on a Friday, a Saturday, and of course on a Sunday race day. But what are the problems with track limitations and the rules surrounding them with the FIA, and what are the solutions to try and give us a bit more stability and cohesion across the network of F1 tracks in Formula One? I'm Ollie Wilson for GPFans, and this is our special on track limits and where you can and can't go wrong. Before we go any further, hit the subscribe button down below to stay up to date with everything that we do here at GPFans. Now, let's get into the special. Of course, Formula One is driven on a lot of very different circuits. In principle, the same rule of thumb applies everywhere when it comes to track limits. The track ends at the white line along the asphalt. In addition, there is of course often a curbstone, but the car must at least remain within those white lines. So you often see that drivers will make full use of the curbs, but do their best to keep the smallest strip of rubber on their tyres on that right side of the all-important white line. If they can do that, we're all good. We've done nothing wrong in any situation. With Bahrain, however, we saw something very different happening. Time and time again earlier on this season, we saw drivers going completely outside of the white lines with their cars, and sometimes even miss the curbs completely. That includes Lewis Hamilton. Now, Bahrain track limits. In the free practice session and qualifying, being outside that white line would have resulted in the cancellation of a lap time. The FIA was very clear about that. In certain corners, you can get quite a bit more speed if you don't stick to the track limits. So the FIA decided to be super strict about it on Friday and Saturday. However, in the race on Sunday, the FIA was just a little bit more lenient. There, the stewards would issue a warning if a driver repeatedly exceeded track limits in certain corners. Now, however, there is a debate about how long that should last, with drivers allowed to go off track time and time again without any warning whatsoever. You can also ask yourself, why is it not just enforced as sharply in the race as it was on Friday and Saturday? Yielding an advantage. Anyway, we go back to the general rules about track limits. So you have to stay within the white lines, and yet it is sometimes allowed if you don't. A little bit confusing, there's a few grey areas in there. It's like this. It is not necessarily beneficial to drive outside the white line in every single corner. It is generally only enforced by the stewards on turns where exceeding the track limits gives an advantage. In Bahrain, for example, that was at turn 4. In Spa, there are always very keen eyes on Radillon, on the outside of the corner when the drivers have come up the hill from Eau Rouge. If you take that corner too wide, you can get a lot more speed going onto that big, long straight. Verstappen's overtake. What Verstappen did to Lewis Hamilton in Bahrain this season was something a little bit different. According to the stewards, he gained a lasting advantage by going outside of the track limitations, namely that he ended up in front of Lewis Hamilton. Now, overtaking outside the track is something that is punished in Formula One, as it should be, and that is exactly what happened to Verstappen. A similar situation as to when Verstappen overtook Raikkonen a few years ago just before the finish by going outside of the track limits in Austin in Texas. Anyway, Hamilton also had a lasting advantage by taking lap after lap after lap outside of the track limits, but he didn't have one in the same way that Verstappen did, so Hamilton went unpunished, but Verstappen, with his overtake outside of the track limits, was reined back in by the stewards. More physical track boundaries. Perhaps the biggest problem with track limits in Formula One is that many circuits are very generous with the runoff outside of the white lines, particularly on the more modern circuits. There are huge patches of asphalt on many tracks next to the track boundaries, so you won't really get in trouble as a driver if you drive outside of the limitations. If the FIA also acts leniently, you are almost crazy if you don't push the limits to make yourself get the most advantage you can over the opposition, and pushing those limits means pushing the track limits. To make it all a bit clearer, drivers often argue for more physical track boundaries. Sometimes, for example, you see those kind of big sausage curbs next to the track that make you bump enormously high into the air and can even cause damage to the underside of the car when you go outside of the track limitations. Gravel traps and walls. Another solution, which is sometimes already available in some circuits, is the construction of gravel traps. If you go off track or clip a gravel trap or run directly into it, you're certainly going to be hindered massively. And then, of course, you have walls. On many circuits, it's simply not possible. It would be life-threatening to put walls up everywhere along the track. But here and there are tracks where there are walls, and in principle, little can go wrong with them in those situations. In Monaco, for example, you have no problems at all with the track limitations because the barriers running all the way around the circuit create a rather dangerous barrier for the drivers, which, as we all know, you cannot afford to clip. Otherwise, it's game over. So what do you think about track limitations? Should we see more of these asphalt runoffs? Should the stewards be a little harsher on Sundays compared to Friday and Saturday's action when penalising drivers during the race? Or do we just want to see these modern circuits perhaps given the gravel traps that we see at places like Monza to make sure we see the cars racing in the right direction in the right area of the circuit? Let us know in the comments section below your thoughts, and of course, before you go any further, hit that subscribe button down below to stay up to date with everything that we do here at the channel at GPFans.